picture this. You're settling into your seat, on a long-haul flight, that vacation mode starting to kick in, and then, bam! Just a few minutes after takeoff, everything changes. That's what happened on Qantas Flight 32. And that's what we're diving into today. A story that's, well, it's frankly terrifying, but it's also a testament to some truly incredible skill under pressure.
Oh, absolutely.
We're talking about an Airbus A380, the super jumbo.
Like behemoth.
Exactly. This thing was cruising from London to Sydney with a quick refueling stop in Singapore, but that's where things went very, very wrong.
Yeah.
And for our listeners, this isn't just us recounting a scary flight. We're going deep into the what-if moments, the chain of events that could have been catastrophic, and honestly, how the crew's actions that day became the stuff of, aviation legend.
Well, that's what always gets me, right? It's not just a freak occurrence. You see, this incident, it exposes the limits of even these incredibly advanced machines, and it really shines a light on the human element, how we make decisions in a crisis when the stakes are, well, sky high.
So let's set the scene. It's just after 10 a.m. in Singapore. Flight 32 is climbing. What was that oh shoot moment that everyone on board must have felt?
So imagine this. You're hearing that rumble of the engines, that slight vibration you get on takeoff.
Yeah.
And then, bam! This noise rips through the cabin. Passengers later said it was like a bomb went off. A sudden, violent jolt. And in the cockpit, pure chaos. Alarms going off, control panels lighting up like Christmas tree gone haywire.
I can only imagine.
One of the Rolls-Royce engines, and these things are massive, had essentially exploded.
Exploded, not just, sputtered or stalled or something.
A full-on explosion. And it wasn't just the noise you see. Shrapnel from the engine ripped through the wing, sliced through fuel lines, damaged critical systems. It set off a domino effect of failures.
Okay, yeah, that's way beyond a fasten your seatbelts kind of situation. Yeah. And then on top of that, they've got to try and fly a plane that's literally breaking apart in the air. What was that like in the cockpit?
Worse than you'd think. See, planes have this system called ECAM, right? It's basically the brain of the aircraft.
Right.
When the engine failed, the ECAM went nuts, flashing over 50 different error messages at the pilots. And these weren't just your low oil or check engine lights. These were critical warnings, some of them even contradicting each other.
Oh, wow.
Imagine trying to read a manual while someone's ripping pages out, shredding them around you. That's what they were dealing with.
So not just information overload, but panic-inducing overload. How do you even begin to process that, let alone prioritize what to do first?
That's the thing about Captain de Crespigny and his crew. They were exceptional. You'd expect panic, right? Maybe even freezing up. But they kicked into this high-gear problem-solving mode.
Wow.
De Crespigny, he stayed calm, started delegating tasks. And his first officer, Matt Hicks, this guy was like a human computer. He was sifting through those ECAM messages at lightning speed, figuring out which ones were critical, which ones they could deal with later.
Talk about teamwork under pressure. But at this point, weren't they also dealing with a very real risk of fire?
You bet. Leaking fuel right next to a hot, damaged engine. It's every pilot's nightmare. And we're not talking about a small engine fire here. This was the potential for a catastrophic explosion, the kind that could bring the whole plane down.
And to make matters even worse, I was reading that they couldn't just turn around and land immediately. They were too heavy. How does that even happen?
Good question. It all comes down to physics and, honestly, very careful safety calculations. The A380, it's got these very specific landing weight limits. You exceed them, you risk seriously damaging the landing gear. You could even overshoot the runway entirely.
Makes sense.
I think of it like a car that's way overloaded. Slamming on the brakes at high speed is risky enough, right?
Right.
Now add all that extra weight, and suddenly it's near impossible to stop safely.
So you've got a damaged plane, potential fire, you're too heavy to land. It's basically every airplane disaster movie I've ever seen. What did they do?
Captain de Crespigny, he knew he couldn't risk landing right away. But he also couldn't stay airborne forever with all those issues. So he made the call, turned the plane around, tried to get back to Singapore.
A calculated risk.
Absolutely. A big one. But they didn't really have another choice.
But even if they made it back, landing a plane that big, that heavy, potentially still damaged, that's got to be like threading a needle but with a jumbo jet, right?
That's one way to put it. It took incredible skill. Nerves of steel, for sure. And remember, it wasn't just the weight and potential damage. They also knew they had limited runway space to work with. One wrong move at that point, and it could have been disastrous.
So what happened? Tell me they stuck the landing.
They did, but it was far from easy. Captain de Crespigny. He brought that massive A380 down with only about 500 feet of runway to spare.
I get nervous just thinking about it.
Oh, yeah.
But even with the landing, even with the wheels down, it wasn't over yet, right? That
Yeah.
leaking fuel.
Right. It was still a huge concern. Emergency services were on high alert. They doused the area around the plane with foam, especially near the brakes because those were overheating,
Yeah.
both from the extra weight and just the stress of that landing. One spark and you could have had a major fire.
It's like something out of a movie. You're on the edge of your seat the whole time. So after all that, after everything, what did investigators find? What was the root cause of this near disaster?
That's where it gets really interesting and honestly a little unsettling.
How so?
It wasn't some big design flaw. It wasn't some major part failure. It was a tiny flawed oil pipe inside the engine.
Wait, are you serious? A tiny part almost brought down an entire A380.
That's the thing. This little pipe, it had this microscopic manufacturing defect, something you could barely even see.
Wow.
And that defect, it caused a fracture, which then led to an oil leak. And that leak escalated into the engine explosion and the whole chain reaction that followed.
It really makes you think, about all those tiny components that have to work perfectly every time you fly.
Right. And here's the thing. For all the technology on these planes, for all the automation, it was the human element that saved the day. It was the crew's skill, their teamwork, their ability to stay calm and make these incredibly difficult decisions under impossible pressure. That's the difference between a near miss and a tragedy.
Qantas Flight 32, it's just this powerful reminder. Even in our age of automation, you can't overstate the importance of human judgment. It's something to think about, really, the next time you're cruising at 30,000 feet.